Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Biollywood Podcast. In this series, we talk about biological threats and pop culture media they appear in. I'm JT O'Brien, Research Principal at the Bipartisan Commission on Biodefense. I'm here with the Commission's Executive Director, Dr. Asha M.
Hi.
And I'm also joined by the Commission's Policy Principal, Rob Bradley.
Hello. Glad to be back.
Today, we will be discussing the post-apocalyptic horror film 28 Days Later, directed by Danny Boyle and written by Alex Garland. The film was released in 2002 and has since become a cult classic in the zombie genre. The premise of this film is that 28 Days Later is set in a post-apocalyptic world where a highly contagious virus known as the Rage virus has decimated the population of the United Kingdom. The story follows a group of survivors as they navigate the dangers of this new world, including infected individuals and other hostile survivors. The film explores themes of survival, humanity, and the impact of a viral outbreak. If you have not seen this film, we highly recommend you do so before continuing this podcast, as this podcast will contain spoilers for 28 Days Later and likely will also contain spoilers for 28 Weeks Later, which came out in 2007. This is your final warning, and from this point forward, we will discuss spoilers. So I think the first thing I want to talk a little bit about is just the virus itself, the Rage virus. And there's some really interesting stuff I came about when I was doing research on this. And actually, they use Ebola as the carrier for this inhibitor that would reduce aggression. The idea was that they were trying to reduce aggression in people, but accidentally they did the opposite.
Oh, interesting. So that explains the monkeys at the beginning, why they even had them. Okay, interesting.
I do think having the monkeys though is not a good idea if you're trying to do this kind of research, because monkeys are already super aggressive.
Well, maybe that was the intent.
Maybe.
I mean,
yeah.
So the intent to inhibit rage, not to incite it.
Correct.
So you're going to start with a test subject that naturally exhibits rage.
That's
or
true.
fantasy, so you can see if you can reduce it.
Right. So it would make it easier, the measurable difference.
Yeah, it would be easier to see.
Exactly.
So yeah, I thought that was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that really beforehand. And it's interesting how it almost reminds me of the movie Hidden that we reviewed the first time on this podcast, where it was, a rage-induced thing. I think also, I know this is considered a zombie movie, but technically they're not dead. They're alive the whole time.
They're just affected.
Yes, which is the difference.
And I will say, as part of my participation in this podcast with you all, it really has made me start to go back and look at these zombie apocalypse movies that come out with such regular frequency that really should be its own subgenre, its own genre of film at this point, and realizing the nuance between each of them, some subtle, some blatant. You've got The Walking Dead, which is clearly venturing into actual zombie territory, World War Z, and then you've got something like this, or even The Last of Us, where the subject of the infection is still technically alive. Its heart is beating such that it still has a heart. It hasn't technically expired, and that's really interesting to see. Although I will admit, and we'll get to it, I'm sure, here later, I've also, I think, become somewhat, I'll say, jaded about the feasibility of some of these apocalypse scenarios, especially when the subject is living, or it purports to live.
I think it's interesting because it does call to question how you define life.
Mm-hmm.
What is living? If your whole mind has been taken over entirely by a fungus or a virus or whatever it is, just because your heart is beating, does that mean you are alive? And even if you say you are alive, are we really talking about recoverable people? If you can't be recovered and you're just endlessly rage-filled, then is it okay? It starts to inform some of these ethical questions.
Right.
Is it okay to just kill them? Because really, we're not getting them back anyway. We don't have a cure. Although I guess we might have a cure in the future, but even if we got these people back, how could you possibly imprison all of them individually in a little...
Yeah.
There's just the infrastructure is...
And they would die anyway because they would starve.
Well,
they would starve.
On that points to the response as well. How do you knowledge of what organism, if it is in fact a living organism you're dealing with, and its capabilities and its limits is very much important when you're dealing with an apocalypse scenario and you're trying to figure out the best way to respond. As it turns out in this film, the limitations of the infected are such that really quarantine makes sense if you have it available to you to just wait them out. But that's not always going to be the case, depending on what pathogen or infected individual you're dealing with.
And in this case, how fast it moves.
Exactly.
Yeah, the transmission is comically fast. It's like 30 to 60 seconds.
I will admit,
That.
I turned to my wife in the very first scene with the monkeys, and I was like, that wouldn't happen. Diseases don't spread and incubate and pop that quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, frankly, the speed was actually not just startling, it was great filmmaking. I will admit, Danny Boyle does a great job with this film. They really maximized and really leveraged their low budget very effectively. The quick cuts of the actual cinematography really kind of evokes a frenetic, frantic, unknowing future. And since the protagonist has had his head messed with, ostensibly leading into it, it's like you're seeing reality through his eyes, which I thought was really cool. But when that scene happened, my first thought was, if this happens this quickly, how can it possibly transmit all around the world at any point in time?
I think that's a good point, because I don't think it can. I think this is a bad virus.
Yeah. I think it's a terrible virus for transmission purposes.
And it just doesn't make a lot of sense. Why would you pick Ebola? Because I guess their intent with this was for it to be a passive, self-spreading sort of vaccine for violence and rage.
Okay.
Why would you use Ebola? Why not use something a little bit more benign like flu, especially if your intent was for it to spread, rather than using Ebola and having that bloodborne or liquid-borne route of transmission?
Was it intended to spread?
Yeah.
Well, yes, I think, well, I want to take a step back for a second. As much as I appreciate the film for being a film, there's a lot that it doesn't explain.
Exactly.
And a lot of what we're talking about, just for anyone who might be listening, it comes from outside sources. Yes. Perhaps the sequel film, which I have not admittedly seen, but I've read a quick exposition of. So the idea of what the intent was with this,
right?
What it actually was, and how it came to be. A lot is left in the dark for anyone who has only watched the movie.
Right.
As far as you know, they were randomly experimenting on monkeys. These, animal rights activists somehow become aware of these monkeys. They enter this lab. They become aware. It's a primate research center, so they know the primates are there. They enter the lab, and then they attempt to free them, and then bedlam ensues. But we find out separately elsewhere that the intent was to spread this inhibitor amongst the general populace to reduce rage en masse without consent.
Yeah. No.
Now that you're mentioning this, there is a movie based on the television show Firefly. That movie, we're going to have to add it to our list to take a look at. But this notion of getting rid of rage or negative emotions, it comes up in that movie too. I wonder how often this is a storyline now that and why are we trying to vaccinate against emotions?
Well,
yeah.
And a question I have, and you were talking about the feasibility, and none of this really works. But going back to that first scene, when we were talking about the genesis of this, if your intent is to create an inhibitor for rage, and you are witnessing these monkeys becoming more aggressive, what do you do at that point? I mean, my first thought is clearly this experiment has become a failure. So gather the data on these monkeys and then burn or otherwise dispose.
What does the scientist say? Doesn't he say something about there's more to learn, or we can study them, or something?
Yeah.
So they're just trying to get more data, I guess. Rob, I guess.
I mean, I think that this is like a classic dual use kind of case where they were working on something, got the opposite intended effect, and it was like, oops.
Well, but that's if we're going with this external analysis.
Right.
What I thought when I saw it at first was, I thought there were humans that were getting overly violent, and that someone had taken clinical specimens out of them and grown the virus somewhere, and then we're taking that and infecting the monkeys intentionally to study it, not to create this vaccine business, but to study the disease. In that case, you would not kill the monkeys because you're trying to figure out what's going on, and you're trying to, I mean, you might be pulling blood samples at certain times, going into the future, etc. So that could be. There's another explanation too, which is that one scientist was down there with all those primates all by himself.
Yeah.
They could be, and they were getting ready to kill them.
Yeah.
Very bad.
And they were just like, dude, just stand here for a while, and 10 minutes later, somebody might have come in to get rid of them.
But I had a lot of questions about that scene. One, why, if these monkeys are as dangerous as this man clearly indicates that they are, why do you have one monkey just kind of lying down, watching a bunch of screens in an open air and not in an enclosed space?
They were trying to look at what was going on in
Sure.
his brain.
I mean, I guess best case scenario, that monkey did not have the virus inside of him, maybe.
Yeah.
Also, how did they find out that it was contagious? Does that mean that they tested? They tested. Had some monkeys in a cage enclosed space with infected monkeys to see if it would spread. I mean, I guess that's a distinct possibility.
Yeah, I think that's how they tested it to make it contagious, but then also supposedly using parts of people virus.
Well, what I thought was more ridiculous was that the animal rights people come in and just don't listen at all to the scientist. Don't even go and look at a piece of paper to find out what's going on there. I am assuming they thought maybe it was like perfume testing, but we don't do that on primates. We do that with other kinds of animals. Just kind of the abject stupidity of all of that. I understand the desire not to see animals being treated this way. I understand it. However, my issue is they're smart enough to know that something's going on. They're smart enough to go find this place because obviously it wouldn't have been advertised somewhere that, hey, we're doing these experiments in this place. But then you get there and it's like, okay, well, we choose not to listen to the scientist and we're just going to randomly let these things go. I just thought it's just dumb. It's just stupid.
Yeah, it is dumb, but I could totally see that happening.
You think people just, what do you think they were thinking then?
I think they were like hard left PETA, maybe, or something like that.
Actually, I'm not going to comment on their politics, but I could see a scenario in which these individuals who might not be very trustworthy of authority go walk into a lab, see a bunch of monkeys that are visibly angry, might think they're angry because they're being stuck inside of cages or boxes. A authority figure walks in and says, do not open those, they are infected. Kind of isn't willing to exactly tell them what it is other than rage, which doesn't help his case at all. And I'll talk about him a little bit more in a second. I could see from their perspective, they just think it's that it is baloney, and that they want to that they are going to free the animals because this individual who has sanctioned and condoned and participated in the experimentation of these animals is in no position to tell them what is morally right or wrong in that moment. I could see that.
Okay.
By the way, while we're on the topic, I don't know what BSL level this laboratory was, but how could you be in a room with those animals knowing what they could potentially transmit, apparently knowing that they are infectious to humans, and not be wearing any sort of PPE?
Well, yeah, the monkeys will spit at you. They throw their feces at you.
Yeah, but I think what they were trying to say in this movie and the following movie is because it's bloodborne and not airborne, the movie people thought we can leave it at a low BSL. And we've separated all these monkeys anyway. And maybe nobody's getting close enough to them in those, little jails that they were in. Maybe. But in the second movie, they're just wearing surgical masks to even pull a blood sample. And how many movies have we seen now where even that, she's not even wearing gloves?
Yeah.
And in the movie Outbreak, that's a big plot point that even with the gloves, the guy is thrashing, moving around, and the needle comes out and stabs somebody else through the double gloving, through everything. So I agree with you on that one, Rob, especially for the scientists. Unless he wasn't doing anything. Again, unless he was just sort of hanging out and not doing anything with any of those monkeys, just told, just sit here. Or maybe he was there to analyze a bunch of data and happened to be in the same room. Although, again, I would question that. Why would you, like, if it were me, I would be saying, I need a separate office than whatever's going on here. Because I wouldn't even want to look at these poor animals.
I was going to say, I mean, given how terrified he seemed to be of these animals and what they could feasibly spread, I wouldn't want to be left alone in a room with just them and what would appear to be a pane of plastic separating acrylic. That's not separating me from them without at least some PPE. That just seemed a little haphazard.
And now, do we think that this is government sanctioned or government research or government sanctioned research? Public or private sector?
Well, we know that it happened at Cambridge, I think.
The university?
Yes.
Okay.
It was referred to as the Cambridge Primate Research Center.
Okay. So academic research, maybe not conducted with full understanding and backing of the government.
Yeah.
Possible.
I think working on something like this, like if you sent a project proposal and proposing to make the way we think they intended, say, to make the inhibitor actually work instead of being an activator, it just wouldn't.
But who would you?
That would draw government scrutiny, I think.
But I think it depends on how you describe the research. If you're saying we're doing something in a BSL-1 and this is our justification, unless you're getting federal funding, why would they even know about it?
Yeah, you're right.
You know, the way we're looking at it kind of after the fact and saying, well, the characteristics of this virus clearly make it so that it should be studied in a BSL-4.
Right.
But if your approach to it is completely different, well, what I'm trying to say is, if you're not thinking that this is something that falls under the select agent rule here in the United States, I don't know what it is in the UK, who are you reporting this to?
Well, how did they get how are they allowed to work on Ebola without reporting it?
Right.
They're modifying.
Well, again, this is JT being informed by something outside of the actual movie.
In the actual movie, we don't have any indication. But so it's a good point. If it's not something that is already pre-established and known to be a threat, then you're right. There is no need to notify.
Who are they notifying?
Yeah.
Other than somebody in the university itself as part of the review board process.
Yeah.
So this is a big insult to Cambridge.
It really is. Yeah, it really is. Makes them look not as professional.
Yeah.
So looking at with the second movie a little bit.
Okay.
You mentioned that there was a carrier in the second film.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the carrier a little bit?
Yeah. So in the second movie, the premise is that the infecteds in the United Kingdom have all died, or most of them have died. The vast majority of them died. They have starved to death because after they attack people who have not yet been infected, I'm guessing they don't attack each other or whatever. They've run out of whatever they exist on and they've died. Yeah. That at least is the assumption. The United States Army comes in to secure the United Kingdom. I don't know why it's the U.S. Army specifically.
Is it NATO or is it just?
It was just the United States Army. But in comes the United States Army. They have people on rooftops and stuff. The rooftop piece is important to answer your question. So 2 children are repatriated back to the United Kingdom. Lots of people are being repatriated because the military believes, hey, everything's gone. Let's get them out of the various countries, I guess particularly our country, and no more refugee status for them. Let them go back. So they go back. They're very young. One is maybe in elementary school. The other one is maybe in junior high, let's say. These 2 kids come back. Their dad is there. He is like a mechanic or sort of a maintenance type of person. He has access to everything all over this particular area that they're going back to. They take them back to, I think it's Dogs Island, something like that. It's an island that's part of the United Kingdom, where apparently they had a home previously. Now, they're not supposed to go back to their house. They're supposed to stay in the facility, but they don't. These two kids decide they're going to go back to their own house because, hey, everybody's dead anyway. When they go back to the house, it's the house. They're going through the kitchen. They're taking photographs. They're fully intend to go back to the facility. They just thought, we're going to collect some of our own stuff. And the little boy, the younger child, goes upstairs. They're just sort of wandering around, and he hears a noise, and it turns out it's his mother. The mother, who at the beginning of the movie was left in a house that was being overtaken by these rage-filled zombie people, while her husband, who got very, very scared and just sort of flipped out and ran away, left her behind, assuming that she was dead.
Yeah.
But she's not dead. She is a carrier. So the military comes in. The Overwatch guys they knew that these kids were running around. They could see them moving. And they were always going to go and get them, but now they have this extra reason to go and get them because now, of course, it's not safe, and here's the mother. They get the mother, and the military medical folks that have been providing support medically, but also research-wise, would take out her blood and take a look at it. Again, with just a surgical mask, nothing, no double gloving or anything. But that is when they discovered that she is a carrier. The initial assumption was that she was immune, that she had been infected, that her body mounted a true immune response, killed the virus, and she was just experiencing maybe a few of the after effects, but not carrying the virus. But when they look at it under the microscope, you can see the virus is actually moving and it's living. So she's a carrier. And they don't know what they should do. The medical side, the researcher is saying, we need to study her. We need to study her blood. Even though she's a carrier and she's not immune, this could lead to a vaccine or a treatment or something. Something's going on because she's clearly, her immune system, while it hasn't killed the virus, is able to live with this virus and not be totally over the top, rage filled. So that's the story of her.
If you don't mind me going back for a second to the military activity there, just based on your own personal experience, does it, when we're thinking about outbreak response, in this hypothetical situation, would the military really be okay with beginning to bring settlers, for lack of a better word, repatriation individuals close to what is still at that point in time deemed a hot zone, when they haven't gone through what I would imagine being the very time-intensive process of ensuring that all the buildings and surrounding areas have been cleared of infected before essentially introducing new potential victims or fuel for another outbreak, kind of almost adjacent to that hot zone. It seemed like it was a little premature.
I agree with your assessment that, the doctor, what she sees that children are coming in, she goes right up to the general and says, nobody informed me this was happening. We don't understand the virus. We're not sure that it's gone entirely. We don't know what's going to happen with children now. So this is a bad idea. But he says this is what we're doing. I think that what's unrealistic is exactly what you're saying. I cannot imagine a situation, especially with the constrained environment on an island. It's not the entire United Kingdom. It's some tiny island. I can't imagine a situation where anybody in the Army or the Marine Corps, either one, would not have gone house to house, room to room, and cleared, especially since in that movie, they're very clear to show you that if you shoot one of these zombie things, that they do die. They die. Yeah. So how is that different than clearing any house? but they didn't.
Well,
Or I will say, they did it to a certain extent and then said, this is really dumb because everybody's dead, and made an assumption. But I cannot, on behalf of my former branch of the military, I can't imagine that the Army would be okay with that. That, hey, we don't need to make sure. Why wouldn't you? Of course, this is a movie and we want the drama of it.
Yeah.
Well, especially if let's assume that this virus is Ebola based. And we've seen from 28 Days Later that, long after these individuals have expired, as we saw with Brendan Gleeson's character, all it takes is one drop of blood from even a corpse to infect you.
Right.
So we're not just talking about clearing an area in terms of disposing or killing of infected, but also essential environmental remediation, clearing bodies, burning bodies, ensuring that there isn't any fluids.
So here's the thing. In the second movie, they lose control of the situation because she winds up infecting the dad who shows up and stupidly kisses her. Ugh. And then, gets the virus within milliseconds.
Yeah.
And then goes around infecting all different other kinds of people. They lose control. They start shooting people, the uninfected or the infected. Then they start shooting everybody because there's no way to
Different.
Things are moving so quickly. Then they just lose control. They have naval or Air Force fighter bombers come in and just bomb the crap out with incendiary munitions. They're just burning everything. When I saw that, I thought, well, why didn't they just do that in the first place?
Exactly.
But I think the answer to that question is they were trying to maintain the infrastructure and decided, the zombies aren't really destroying houses and stuff. Unless they're trying to get to somebody, they're not doing that. So maybe it's better. The notion of or the value of critical infrastructure in wars and campaigns is quite high, and there are a lot of weapons that we have created throughout history that we thought we could use in an attempt to leave the infrastructure perfectly fine. So maybe this was some of the thinking. I don't know, but I think the question is, why did they ever think in this movie or in the second movie? Why did they actually ever think? Where's the proof that it's under control? Is really your question, right?
Yeah.
It was the proof.
Where's the proof that it's under control? What are your protocols to ensure it's under control? And at what point do you think it's actually safe to bring civilians anywhere near what was a bloodbath just a few short months ago, at a time in which that anything in the environment could potentially spark a new outbreak if you put new people near it?
Yeah. And what about, let's since you're talking about remediation, during the anthrax events of 2001, this was a big question.
Yeah.
Anthrax letters go. We got anthrax moving around in air handling systems, we believe. Infects is probably a bad way to mention what happened to the buildings, but gets into 6, 7, 8 different buildings on Capitol Hill. The EPA gets called in to clean up. The EPA at first says this is not our responsibility. Congress says you have to do this because we believe this is your responsibility. The question that came to everybody's mind was, how do we know it's clean? How clean is clean was the question that was asked. I don't know how they did the testing. We can find out. But I think they used a combination of, they will look at some of the air, we'll do some swiping and stuff. But then at the same time, all these groups of people are going to be on Cipro for some period of time so that just in case they get anthrax, infected with anthrax, they'll be okay. It is not a question that I think has been answered adequately. I think we have a notion of, how clean is clean means zero. But zero on our planet is probably not...
not achievable.
Not achievable. And how would you even prove what that is? We have a recommendation about remediation and the need for that, and to examine things. And we also have another recommendation that has to do with people having been exposed and then being tracked going forward. I'm not convinced from this movie that there was much of an attempt at that. I think, or in the second movie anyway, like with the carrier and all that, they were beginning to talk about that. Is there value to keeping the carrier alive and just feeding her and whatever, and just seeing what's the progression of this disease or progression of the organism inside of her as it comes up against her immune system. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think this is a really good question. What does it mean? And what does it mean, not just, okay, so anthrax on Capitol Hill, we did not deploy the entire United States Army to control Capitol Hill. This is a different scenario. But if you're going to involve a foreign government's military, I think these are decisions that should be made in advance. How clean is clean? What are the requirements? Somebody should have decided. And maybe they did. Maybe somebody decided we're not going to house. We've decided that it just looks like everybody's dead. And I don't think it was good enough.
Yeah. But I think you're absolutely right that at the very, very least, whatever your protocols are for remediation, you should execute those protocols before you start thinking about bringing the population back into play. And I understand that, given the devastation that was wrought on the country as a whole, you'd want to maintain as much of the infrastructure as you could. But you got to do it right, or else you risk, as we see in that second film, a resurgence.
Yeah. And then killing all the infrastructure anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah. Basically back to square one.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing since there's another film coming out, but that didn't work either.
Well, at the end of 28 weeks, it's still not under control. It's gotten off the island somehow, despite the strafing, despite the fires and all of that. And what you see is the zombies running. And then in the distance, you see the Eiffel Tower. So now it's not only off the island, it's not even in the United Kingdom anymore. It's jumped, however it jumped to France. It probably went. I bet you how it went through the channel. Yeah.
That's probably how it got there.
Yeah.
Good point. I didn't even think about the channel as a possibility. Because of
it's the indoor air quality, by the way.
Yes, it does. And our indoor air quality work. So that's obviously, we kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, but I think there's a good opportunity to talk about the fact that in the first movie, there's this kind of back and forth or speculation about whether or not the disease actually got off the island, right? Whether or not it's the whole world that they talk about early in the movie, that the virus got to Paris and New York, but it's all rumors that that's what happened. And then you have that one soldier who's helping Cillian Murphy's character, Jim, and the two women try to escape the other military soldiers, kind of ranting and raving, that there isn't an apocalypse, that it's just on the British Isles and that, or in England.
It's just the flu.
It's not that it's just the flu, but it's. I see what you did there. But just that, contrary to these soldiers thinking they have to restart civilization as we know it, that he's of the opinion that it's only here. And what he actually, as part of the ranting, he at one point he says, "What do you think they would do with a diseased little island like ours? They quarantined us." And as it turns out at the end, that appears to be what happened. That the virus didn't stretch much beyond England to the rest of the world.
But you know what? Even if we just look at Ebola. We haven't quarantined the Congo.
Well, exactly. I don't know if it's even an intentional quarantine. I think he's just ranting about it in that moment, but it's a convenient way. Think about it. If the Congo were an island, maybe we would have.
Maybe. Yeah.
It's impossible truly to quarantine a landlocked country like that the way that or not impossible, but the amount of forces it would take would be tremendous. But with England, pretty much it would be much easier just by virtue of the geography. I don't know if it was an intentional quarantine so much as it was that the rest of the world wasn't coming to the rescue.
Right.
They were content to let it burn out, I think.
Well, and I guess as was the rest of the United Kingdom, if this guy is accurate.
Yeah. But I think it points to what we talked about earlier. This virus moves so quickly from person to person. Am I just ruining your flow of conversation?
Not at all. No. My voice is losing it.
Oh, okay, good. Happy to do that. You're listening here. But the virus just moves so quickly that one of the first thoughts I had as I was watching this was, there's no way an infected person makes it onto an airplane or a boat or anything along those lines to get off of this island to go anywhere else, except maybe through the channel. The only exception I could think of is if a rowboat was already in the process of moving very slowly away from England and an infected person accidentally fell into it. But because the visible signs of infection emerge almost immediately, there's no incubation period.
Okay.
There's no time at which someone would unknowingly be transmitting this disease anywhere else through conveyance.
But I don't think that that's how they portray it. Instead, they portray it like the person becomes infected, they immediately start attacking everybody near them, but they also seem to run. They're just running and running and running and running. They're running to get other people. So I can imagine if some conveyance was pushing off, a big cruise ship, for example, was pushing off, and somehow one of these things were able to jump off a pier and into the boat, or run off the gangplank and into the boat. I think that might be possible. But I agree with you. It's not a situation in which, there's an incubation period and oh no, and now, a whole week later, now we understand that everybody's infected. It's not that.
Yeah.
I will say, for the movie's convenience, you don't have to, there's no worrying about that. There's no incubation period at all. It's just, it's one and done.
There's no worry about surveillance. There's nothing,
You don't have to look at them.
Yeah, exactly.
Except with the introduction of the concept of these carriers.
True, right? Very true. Obviously, that complicates it much more. But if we are assuming, as we only see in the first movie, hypothetically, that anyone who is infected has visible signs of infection almost instantaneously, then there's no need to really worry about who has it that we don't know has.
Well, here's a question for you guys. In the first movie, Cillian Murphy comes back and he's trying to fight for his newfound friends. And he becomes very rage filled and is doing some crazy stuff, to the point that the other women are like, do we need to shoot you because you're infected with this virus?
Mm-hmm.
My question for you is, while not in the first movie, but in the second, do we think he might have been a carrier? Because the mother in the second one, she wasn't all sweetness and light. She was like, when she went to hug her son, he was saying to her, it's too hard. You're hugging me too hard. And not like, Mom, get off of me. It was like she was hurting him. She had some of this inside her. It just wasn't
amplified as much.
Fully amplified.
She was in more control than
So maybe Cillian was a carrier.
We can't rule it out. We obviously didn't see any visible signs of infection, but he I'm not gonna say covered in other people's blood, but he did encounter other blood while he was venturing.
What about this concept? Perhaps we're all carriers because we all had the rage. We're assuming that this is all about the virus, the Ebola-like virus. There he is. Maybe it is there, because we all have rage. We all get angry.
Yep. I can't rule it out.
Yeah.
It could be a possibility.
But yeah, so I mean, when we think about this sort of thing, the rapid onset of symptoms, the way in which society just seemingly fell pretty quickly. I mean, how do you respond in that scenario? Do we think that the UK government responded to the extent there was even a government beyond beyond the immediate outbreak? What could they have done differently in that scenario?
Well, it did make me wonder what Porton Down was up to.
Yeah.
If
this was all going on.
If there's all going on, and especially with a facility like that, they're all locked up tight. I don't know how how the virus would have gotten in, because I don't think a person, even if they are a hysterical, rage-filled zombie, could have been able to get in.
Yeah.
But who knows? I don't know. We don't really see the whole of the United Kingdom. We see London,
Right.
and then some of the countryside.
Yeah.
I will say there's no need for diagnostics in this one,
There's not. Yeah. There's no.
unless we're looking for carriers.
Right. In which case, then it'd be nice to know. But I think like a lot of the circumstances of this virus, it should have been not easy, but easier that it's portrayed in the film to contain. If it spreads that quickly and they only have a limited amount of adrenaline or energy or whatever to run on, it should be pretty simple to just do quarantines, I would think.
Why? Why are you saying that?
Well, because like for the reasons Rob is saying, you can instantly identify who the infected are.
I know, but they're moving so fast.
They're moving really quickly.
You would have to get. I guess I agree with you. If you have good, not biosurveillance, but like good awareness of what's going on somewhere else in the world. Yeah. So it seems to me like if you're in France and you have awareness before it ever gets to France, you could set up a perimeter basically,
Right.
and just be picking zombies off as they come across in the channel or across some water or whatever. In theory, you should be able to do that, but you would have to have that awareness
That it was happening.
that it was happening and be able to move quickly enough to get people with ammunition and stuff in place. Number one, and then number two, I would think that if the world said, this is a disaster, we're just going to have to sacrifice the entire United Kingdom, perhaps the whole world, not the whole world, the whole nation, somebody might decide we have to drop a nuclear weapon. But that's not a decision that is, if the whole world is making it, that's going to require the United Nations to get together, at least the United Nations Security Council to get together and make a decision. I can't imagine, even if we thought this is what we need to do, I can't imagine that the United States just by itself is just going to lob a nuclear weapon.
No, you definitely need to talk about it if you're going to do something like that. Because otherwise,
well, now we're talking about time, right? This is what I'm saying. Like, I'm sure how quickly
we'd be able to
do it, especially considering how terrible our biosurveillance is anyway. But to me, there are two different things. There's biosurveillance, and then there's just awareness of what's going on, that something is going on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, especially once it's escalated to multiple city centers throughout the country, it becomes extreme, very populated areas, and understanding that these the infected, have no issues just roaming the countryside, even outside of the major population centers. I suppose by the time that you've hit that point, the government no longer has an ability to properly respond anymore, short of just ordering mass executions of anyone near the infected that they see. And I think after a certain point, you're looking at it from the global perspective of we're quarantining the whole island, we're shutting off the Channel Tunnel, and we're just hoping it burns itself out. Especially if you knew, as we do know at the end of this movie, that after a number of weeks, these individuals will eventually expire on their own without adrenaline.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that there are a number of movies that kind of try to get at the same point. I think it plays upon a fear that we have that we can't control it. But like the Train to Busan, this is another really fast-moving virus that's...
Yeah, it's very similar. In fact, like in the way that they're coming back from that tunnel.
Yeah.
And the way you were describing, they're set up with rifles.
With rifles and so...
Looking at this tunnel.
But it's very fast. It's moving fast, and it's just spreading through the population just like water in the ocean. It's astounding. What do you do at the end of that movie? We're actually not sure what happens at the end of that movie, but by the time the second movie comes around, what you find out is the world has quarantined like all of Korea or wherever this was going on. The whole thing has just been quarantined. So it's possible you could do that. But I think we're still back to some of these same questions. How do you know it's not gotten somewhere else?
How do you know it's not in the animal population?
How do you know it's in the Train to Busan, it is in the animal population? How do you know when it's going to mutate? Because clearly those monkeys were able to keep the virus inside of them.
And then transmit it to humans.
And then transmit it to humans.
Somehow. Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. So who's to say? Especially, when you look at, we see so many examples now, but, and not to say that H1N1 is the same thing as Ebola, but the fact that that virus has mutated enough to be in so many different animal populations is, I think, a great concern.
Give me H5N1.
H5, what did I say? H1N1?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm thinking back to 2009. Yeah, but it's in and H5N1 right now is in so many populations. So what would you do in something like this scenario where it's moving so fast?
Yeah.
What happens if and when it hits at least the mammalian population?
I mean, at that point, you're really looking at contingency planning or planning, figuring out what you do if your normal response plans just are no longer effective or even relevant. And we can look at it, the H5N1 as an example. The normal response protocol has always been cull any, not just infected chickens, but any chickens around the infected chickens in an effort to stem the outbreak. Could you imagine trying to do that with the human population, especially in the world of 29 days later? Let's just kill the entire population of London just to make sure this doesn't spread.
It is the right thing to do.
Even if it's the right thing to do.
What's happening with the cattle?
Exactly.
In theory, we should be following our same protocol of culling.
Yeah.
But no one's willing to do that because
the cattle on a per cow basis are worth far more and the margins are very tight.
I think it's more than that too, though, Rob. I think that we have a cultural relationship with certain animals and a certain value we place on animals, not just economic. I think the idea of killing that many large mammals is too much for us. We just don't want to do it. And I've oftentimes said, what happens if this moves into horses? This country is going to flip out. Nobody's going to want to shoot the horses. They might have to shoot the horses.
Worst thing will get into dogs.
Dogs? Well, it's already in cats, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Cats are eating dead birds on properties and dying of H5N1.
Yeah. Or like remember the penguins? The penguins that got infected with H5N1 that it went to their brains and it affected them so that they were just flinging themselves off of cliffs and stuff.
Yeah. So I think you're right. There's cultural significance for certain animals. I think there's also economic relevance. The fact that cows oftentimes recover from flu in the way that chickens just cannot from high path avian influenza. And so there's a business consideration there for the poultry farmers. They know that those chickens aren't going to make it. Like we know that the folks who are infected in 20 days later are not going to make it. And so therefore it's an easier decision than when you have a situation where someone might be a carrier, an animal might be visibly ill, but might recover. And it's a harder economic decision to make. But let's assume that you have this normal protocol of culling animals because you know that that's the easiest way to prevent the spread of the disease. Well, now you're in a situation where it's not just in that animal population anymore. So even if you kill every chicken in this country that currently has the disease, you're not just dealing with wild waterfowl bringing the disease back around every migration season.
Yeah.
But you're dealing with cows that might be spreading in amongst themselves and to and from birds, poultry. You've got humans that are now coming down with testing positive for this disease, and other animals as well, other reservoirs for this disease to spread back into the poultry population. Does that mean that we now need to look at our response protocols for how we deal with bird flu in birds? And I think the government is absolutely having to figure out, do we need to more seriously look at medical countermeasures as an option for birds, understanding the ramifications for surveillance, because our normal response protocols are just no longer effective given the realities on the ground. And I think it's very similar to what we see with 28 days later. I don't think any government's response protocol to an outbreak accounts for the sort of speed and ferocity with which this rage virus transmits.
Yeah.
I think those are great points. Is there any other things that you guys wanted to bring up, or any other points that you guys are interested in before we move on to ratings?
I think, again, what I thought was struck by was the speed with which the people that you see in this movie go from living their everyday lives to just assuming the world has come to an end. We were accustomed to seeing it in other films and other shows, but usually it's years down the road, or at least a year or two down the road. We're talking about 28 days, less than a month, and these people are convinced that the world is coming to an end. All their loved ones are dead. Just the speed with which biological events can completely turn our lives upside down, as we all felt 5 years ago. But I felt a lot of resonance with the mindset of these individuals, basically coming to grips with the fact that they are utterly alone and no one is coming to help them. I mean, part of our job here at the commission is to make sure that there is always somebody that can come in and help, and to have the right solution when that time comes.
Because I think, like you're right, like that is an amazing point about this movie. It does show the fragility of society that we have and how quickly it can all fall apart. I can't remember who said it, but someone is quoted saying, "We're only like a few meals away from anarchy."
Yeah.
So yeah, I think this movie really speaks to that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get to the ratings then.
Okay.
So the first category is relevance to commission recommendations.
I mean, look, I think it provides a very extreme scenario, but certainly a scenario that addresses all of our recommendations about
In some way or another, yeah.
I mean, we have a national biodefense strategy. I'm not sure it's taking this into account, and it probably should, but at least we have a national biodefense strategy. It's one of our recommendations. Yeah. I think the question of who's in charge, certain.
Yeah, leadership.
It's all over this movie. Who gets to make these decisions? And especially if we're going to talk about culling human beings.
Right.
Who's going to decide that? It is not going to be some low-level, cabinet-level agency person, period.
Is it a major in the United
It's not going to
Kingdom's forces who has decided he's going to restart society for his 8 men?
Although he might be the highest level person that, at that point, but somebody, whoever's going to make that decision, it's, we're talking about the United Kingdom. The question is, it has to go all the way up to the prime minister, not even the deputy prime minister or whatever, they have over there. We had recommended the vice president to begin with. But I think all of our recommendations pretty much have something to do with this, with the possible exception of our biodefense recommendations.
That's the only one that probably.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about several of our recommendations just in the context of this episode: laboratory biosafety and biosecurity, surveillance or lack thereof,
Need for diagnostics,
medical countermeasure development, some of the response, environmental remediation that we talked about.
I think too, as we were talking about maintaining awareness, the role of the intelligence community might be something that comes into play here, because somebody is going to have to figure out what's going on in these other countries, and we're, especially with something like this moving, we don't even know that we're going to have partner labs, available for the CDC to talk to. There's a whole other side to this that they might be able to ascertain, or at least inform. Same thing with the DoD. Labs that they have, the NAMR labs, all throughout the world.
Yeah.
So I think the intel side of this comes into play as well. We talked about environmental remediation. I don't know about mitigation. I don't think we get to that point. Attribution. I mean, if I were in another country, I'd be wondering what is going on with this? Where does it come from? Somebody's got to study it, at least, if nothing else, a scientific attribution.
Yeah. So a lot of our recommendations.
A lot of those, yeah. So you guys want to give it a 5?
I would say 5.
Yeah, let's give it a 5.
Okay. 5 it is. Next category is scientific accuracy. I feel like this is pretty low.
What did you give it?
I think I gave it a 2.
That's about where I would put it.
They do introduce some interesting concepts, but I don't think they really
I would give it
flesh them out
I would give
completely.
28 Days Later a 2. But I would give 28 Weeks Later a 3. because we at least did have the doctor who was
Get some more.
more on top of what was going on with all of this and at least asking questions about management.
Are we rating both films or just 28 Days Later?
You can.
No, let's do just 28 Days Later. I'm just saying that there was
can
an
put up to it, too.
improvement between those two.
Okay. What do you guys think? 2?
I would say
Let's give it
the instant onset of symptoms is just way too.
Well, also just the beginning, the whole beginning part with that lab and the guy and all of that. It just seemed not accurate.
Yeah. So the next category is scenario development.
Oh, I'd give that at least a 4.
Yeah.
I thought it was a good scenario.
Creativity, yeah. I would say it was very creative, both from a filmmaking perspective, but also from just a biological thread. You know, it was a different approach to posing the question of how would we respond to something like this.
Yeah.
Right. And a different sort of definition of zombie. Right. I don't saw it as a word or see eventually, but
I will say I will subtract half a point, only because I feel like there's this trope of people waking up in hospitals in post-apocalyptic wastelands, because The Walking Dead also starts that way.
Oh, sure.
It's like a mini trope, but apparently it's I meant to find out before this recording which one did it first, if the source material for The Walking Dead did it first, or if this movie did it first. But it's interesting that having a protagonist wake up in a hospital all by themselves is something that has been done.
You're not when we rate our scenarios, we do not rate on the basis of originality.
I suppose that's a fair point.
Oh, we have not yet.
We have not yet.
So, what do we? So you want to give it? I don't want to give it a 3.5.
I'd give it a
Let's give it a 4.
Oh, you can give it.
Yeah, I think a 4. Okay. The next category is entertainment value.
So my problem with 28 days and 28 weeks is that they're very one tone. It's just awful, 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 awful end movie. And I think entertaining movies have a little bit more going on. You don't have to change the tone every minute, but I think they're just more entertaining if there's more going on than just this one tone kind of approach.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe at the end they were getting at a sense of hopefulness because there are airplanes and stuff flying over and there's a chance they might get rescued or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, I found it to be exhausting to watch. I would not call exhausting entertaining.
Yeah, as much as I appreciate it as a film, I would not say that I enjoyed, that I felt great watching it. Let's put it that way.
It's very heavy.
Yeah.
Heavy material.
And like, it certainly had a lot of tension,
Mm-hmm.
but it didn't have any intellectual pieces to it. Like, you weren't sitting there trying to figure out, what, like with Hidden. What's going on? Why is what is happening here? There is no what's happening here. You knew exactly what was happening. To include the source, apparently of the whole thing with the monkeys at the beginning.
It felt more like a character study, like a focus on how do people respond to the circumstance and piecing together how this happened.
Yeah, I don't know. I give it a 3.5.
Yeah. I could do that.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay. The next category is success of the imagination or creativity.
Well, I did think that certainly it was imaginative to be focusing on the emotional component, this rage.
Yes, I thought that was really interesting. And
I thought
that was the emotional and brain involvement. And
yeah,
I think that made it definitely unique from other zombie films. And to your other point, they're not even zombies.
Yeah, I thought it was a different approach. I thought it was different, even though there are other shows and movies where somebody wakes up and the whole world is dead, or at least that's their dream state, and I think that that's the case. But it was interesting to watch Murphy walking around in London, and it did make me wonder, like, how did they even how did they shoot the movie? Yeah.
Especially for such a low budget.
Yeah.
And it was so quiet. Now I get that we can, with today's technology, take noise and stuff out, but this is London. You know, he's walking over bridges and stuff. I thought that was, you know.
And remember, this came out in 2002.
Yeah.
So whatever AI, get rid of the background of your image. Here's that it exists.
Yeah, green screen wasn't really used that much back then.
So
I think that that scene in particular was really impressive for the time. And I think I alluded to before, I think the cinematography and the way that they maximized how they could make the viewer feel with the low budget that they had. I mean, there were times where it felt like they cut the scenes in such a way that the guns fired, but you never actually saw or heard them fire. So they presumably could save money on those sorts of effects. So using the quick cuts to their advantage to create that atmosphere, I thought it was very creative. The baseline premise, aside from it being rage-induced, isn't overly creative because we've seen zombie apocalypse movies before, up to including ones that use similar opening premises for the protagonist. So I feel like I have to deduct a little bit from that, but I would say at least 3 or 3.5 would be where I'd be coming down.
yeah, I think 3.5. What do you think? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. The next category is shock or surprise value. I don't think there is anything very shocking or surprising that I can think off the top of my head.
Well, I think you were meant to be shocked by the military.
Oh, yeah, that one was a shock.
You know, you're supposed at least put off.
Yeah.
But, you know, by the military basically getting a hold of people in theory to restart society, but really because we have to get women to the soldiers or they're all going to lose their minds, and like that whole thing, you're supposed to feel like, ugh,
Yeah.
it's not horrible.
Does it say something about me that I was not at all surprised? That I saw that scene and I'm like, oh, this is going to end this way. I could see where this is going.
I see you weren't. I was like, ugh. Was there anything else in it that was so shocking?
I would say the two moments that stood out and I think are very memorable to me that were I would at least listen or surprising are that first scene, obviously, with the monkeys and the speed and ferocity with which they attack a person and that person gets up and attacks the next person. Because I don't think up to that point we'd seen a lot of zombie movies like that or infected movies like that. And then the scene where Brendan Gleeson gets infected. It's otherwise very quiet, you know. It seems like a safe place. The military is supposed to be nearby, and just randomly gets one drop of blood in his eye, and the whole group's world comes crashing down. You know, this girl loses her father. These people lost their traveling companion and a fatherly figure, and it just happens very suddenly. I mean, I watched this movie for the first time over 20 years ago, and I've always remembered that scene from it. So that part in particular was surprising because of how quickly things turn. The rest of the movie, I don't know, was very surprising.
What about more towards the end when Killian comes back and is so aggressive?
I guess that's a little surprising, but the entire
or shocking, maybe not so much surprising, but shocking how far he was going, to the point that they weren't sure whether he was infected or not.
I did think that interaction where there's that question was a good moment. I think because of the extreme violence happening all around, it didn't really stand out. His actions and his behavior didn't really stand out as much to me because you have actual infected people just murdering soldiers left and right. And you know, so I guess I didn't really track as much that he might come across as almost one of the infected himself until that moment where the women turn him and go, "Are you still you? You know, are you infected?" And then he has to assure them that he's fine.
Yeah.
So
what are we thinking? Another 3.5? 3?
I would say 3.
Yeah.
That's all right. Let's do 3.
Okay. So the next category.
I will say, by the way, in 28 weeks later, that it is the level of stuff going on is, in my opinion, worse, and it is shocking.
Yeah.
And to the point that you don't even know how they managed to film some of this.
Yeah.
The dad, for example, once he turns, he immediately, of course, attacks his wife, who is unfortunately strapped down, and he winds up putting his fingers into her eyes, but the actress is there. Or they figured out how to use a robot or something because she's flailing around, but it's awful.
Yeah.
So there are more shocking things and more surprising things that happened in that movie.
Cool. So, government policy is the next one, and I didn't really see any government. The little government we did see was the UK military.
Yeah, we were those kind guys.
Yeah, so I think you got to
Call the entire United States government.
Or UK military.
UK.
I think we need to give it a 1.
Yeah, because clearly the government has fallen in some fashion.
Yeah, but I don't know that you can call that a policy shortfall. It might have just moved so quickly that there was no time to do anything.
I would say it's a policy shortfall that somehow this sort of experiment was happening at the Cambridge Primate Research Center without their knowledge.
That's true.
That's true.
There was a lack of oversight, or somebody did actually get informed about this research and thought, yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a 0. How can we call it? How can we give it a 1? There's no evidence of.
Have you given zeros in previous episodes? No, this would be the very first 0.
I think it would be the very first 0.
How has the government fared in other movies?
Last of Us, it got a 1. Dune, it got a 2. Those are the only ones I have in front of me right now.
Aliens.
I guess that's to say, can you think off the top of your head of other governments in other movies that have performed worse or as bad as this for consistency purposes? I guess part of the problem here is
we don't see them.
We don't see the government, so they're not given an opportunity to demonstrate utility because they're just gone by 20.
So if that's the question, do we give it a 0 because or because of a 0 because we don't even see them? Or should we make this a dash and say not applicable?
Because we don't. Question. Because aside from not able to properly police or manage the research that was taking place, you didn't really see them or how they responded.
Yeah, that's true. So we could omit government policy on this one.
I think we do hear from forgetting her name, but the female lead, Selena. We do hear from Selena that the government attempted to evacuate the major cities, but only when it was already too late. So there was, you hear of some of the stuff they did in the response, but clearly it's not spoken of in a positive fashion.
Let's give it a 1.
A 1?
Yeah.
Okay. The next category is portrayal by the actors. I think they all did.
I thought Kelly did great.
Yes.
I think everybody was believable. I didn't think anybody. I mean, he was awesome. Everybody else was fine.
Yeah, I thought Brendan Gleeson did a great job bringing Frank to life because he had a really tough job. He had to basically endear himself to the audience over the course of 20 minutes.
Right.
So that when he eventually turns, it's a tragedy, right? And I think he did a great job with that.
Yeah. I would say we give it a 5.
No.
4?
So okay, let's say, the two actors doing a really great job and the rest of them doing a neutral job. I guess counts as a 4.
Yeah,
at least.
Yeah, I would say a 4.
A 4. Sounds good. The next category is direction.
I thought it was directed beautifully, especially the parts where, without the zombies, where Killian's walking through just London, just sort of stripping around.
And they kind of have almost like a road trip, sequence in the middle of the film. I've already spoken glowingly about the cinematography, so I I agree with that.
And 28 weeks later, it's not shot in the same way, and I'm sure there's a different director as well.
Like there might be,
it's a lot of that sort of like, I don't know how to describe it, like, here, then we're over here, we're just like zipping around, because it's a way of, without just having a camera on blood and gore and horror, moving the camera around like that, it's supposed to seem even worse, right? You're just seeing snippets of things happening. But for an entire movie, it's a lot to keep watching.
It's taxing, I'm sure.
So I would say that the direction for the first movie is better than for the second one, because I think they just kind of depended on that zipping around way too much.
It almost seems so quaint as well to see that that 28 Days Later was actually filmed on film, Yeah, which is as you could tell.
Yeah. So
5.
I'd say 4 or 5.
let's give it a 4.5.
Okay.
Yeah.
4.5. Next category is production. I think with the limited budget they had, that it was really, really well produced. I don't really have any complaints. Yeah, I think like bang for your buck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that the production, I think you could tell it's a low budget film, but I mean that's okay. It for what they had available to them, I thought they did a good job. There is a little question in my mind about the direction given to some of the infected, because there are a couple scenes where they just stop walking after like their quarry gets away, and if they're really filled with rage, would they ever actually stop running? And I don't think so. It's particularly in the tunnel scene when they get the car.
I don't think that they worked out the
Bible on how these.
Yes, most they don't have a handbook at that point. Yeah, but that is still part of production.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah.
I think it kind of depends. If you think that part of the post-apocalyptic tone would have been served by the way they did it, even if they had $1 billion, somebody could have decided we want to do it this way, right?
Yeah.
Because it's just like end of the world, and
it's more grounded.
Yeah. Then I don't know that it is bang for the buck. It might just be, this is a good way to do this.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's those little bits around the edges, like the lack of direction to the infected, that show the lack of polish in some places.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. The aesthetic and everything else that could have been achieved, or perhaps might have been a desired outcome for a higher budget movie. Even I think it's a credit to the filmmakers for this movie, because it was, I think, very, very well done.
Okay. So
what do you guys think? 4, 4.5, 5?
I'd say 4.
I think a 4. Yeah.
I think a 4. Okay. And then the very last category is writing. And I am going to lobby for a 4.5.
I would agree with.
On what basis?
I just think it's really well written. I do know this writer as well. I don't know him personally, but I am a fan of this writer, Alex Garland. He is an amazing writer.
Name something that was said that hit you. That said, this is written so well.
I think what makes it powerful is a lot of what isn't said in this movie. And I know that comes down to how the actors portray it, but a lot of it is set up by the script as well. Like I said, this pervasive feeling of doom just 28 days into this event, this loneliness, this intense loneliness, a lot of callback to they need us more than we need them. So reliance on one another. The way that they wrote the scene where Frank is infected, right when they think they're about to be saved by the military, the tragedy that strikes right before salvation. And then even with the scene with the military, which I thought was a little rote, because I was kind of expecting the sexual assault angle. The kind of almost regretful mentality or acting by Christopher Eccleston as the major. He doesn't want to do this. He doesn't want to enable this sort of awareness, but he's doing it because he needed to give his men something to live for in light of all the doom and devastation around. The words that are actually uttered in the film are not, that of a best film, Oscar-winning film.
Yeah.
But I think the way that they set up the plot and the way that they were able to prepare the actors to effectively communicate motivations and relationships, I thought was very well done.
Yeah.
Okay. Well.
Okay.
What do you differently? You see somewhat skeptical.
I guess I just didn't think there was that much. I don't think it was badly written.
Yeah.
But I don't think I would give it a high score for really well written either.
Okay. What would you give it?
Maybe a 3.5.
3.5. What would you give it?
I probably would have done 4.5.
Yeah.
Do we want to meet in the middle at 4?
You want to meet in the middle?
Well, what do you want to give it, Jake?
I think a 4.5 as well. So I think we can move to the middle on 4.
Okay,
All right.
I defer.
We're going to a 4. And that brings our average up to 3.5.
That seems about right.
Yeah. I think that's a respectable score. So, yeah, that's where we stand with 28 Days Later.
Yeah, and for everyone who's listening and excited for 28 years later, I think
No.
Yeah.
Is it years later or months later?
it is years later. I know. I'm disappointed too. I wished it was going to be 28 months later.
Yes,
The new mill. I guess they decided that given how long it's been since the first movie, they might as well just go immediately.
Yeah, I think maybe someone said 20. I thought we found out there was some reason for 28. Like 28 months just seemed 2 years and 4 months. Like, why?
Yeah.
Why are we going after that time frame?
Well, why would we go after 28 weeks later?
I
guess
don't know.
6 months?
6, 7 months. Yeah.
It's all arbitrary.
But it's like even 28 days is a month. 28 weeks is 7 months. 28 months is 2 years and 4 months, I guess. I don't know.
I don't think they were planning out
I don't
for
know.
sequels when the first one came.
Well, I mean, I'm sure there had been some talk about doing a sequel to 28 Weeks Later, but the box office returns weren't enough. They were justified.
Yeah.
So now, since so much time has passed, I mean, honestly, we'll have to see when the movie comes out. But I do wonder if it's just related to production. Like if they just thought it wouldn't make much sense to try to match the aesthetic of the previous 2 films.
Yeah.
And instead just go far enough into the future that they can kind of do whatever they want.
Yeah. Take creative liberty with it.
Exactly. So, but anyway, we obviously are doing this episode in anticipation of the new movie coming out, and hope that those of you who've listened, are as equally interested in seeing how things unfold next as we are.
Well, thank you all for listening, and thank you to Asha and Rob for joining us on this podcast.
Thank you.
And is there anything else that you wanted to say?
Yes. Just remember, the days are numbered.
You can laugh audibly. We can include that.
I was not expecting that. That was good.